Hello, it's Theology Thursday. I'm Adam. Lindsay's coming to join us, and we are covering this week 2, and we're covering chapters 3 and 4 of Tom Wright's God in Public, subtitled How the Bible Speaks Truth to Power Today. Hopefully you caught the video last week covering chapters 1 and 2. And if you haven't, go back and catch up and join us for that week. Don't forget, or for that video, and don't forget there's a single video. We're not doing the shorter video, longer video, just one single video for each week. So yeah.
And we did have a lot of issues with chapter 4 this week.
Yeah, we did.
So that'll be interesting to discuss. Also, if you didn't see on the church's Facebook page. I posted a video earlier in the week of N.T. Wright discussing the future.
At Fuller, right? Fuller Theological Seminary, I think, in California.
And so I feel like that was worth the listen.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a little longish. Like
it's
right
a little,
at
1 hour,
yeah,
like
it's
an
a little
hour
over an hour.
Because at 1 hour and 1 or 2 minutes, he says, I promise, I know I've gone long, but I promise 2 more minutes. I was like, he's right. He's got 2 minutes left.
Yeah. So I listened to it while we had dinner one evening.
Yeah.
You know, it's not something you actually have to physically watch. It's something you can listen to.
It is enjoyable watching, but yeah, you can totally listen.
So chapter 3, Pilate, Caesar, and Bible truth.
Yes. Which is awkwardly worded, Bible truth.
It is, and also Oxford commas.
That's the funny thing is he's a British guy.
I know.
Why don't they use
Oxford commas? Drives me crazy.
Yeah.
So in this chapter, we're discussing John 18 and 19.
Yep.
Which covers the arrest of Jesus and his trials as they were.
Yep.
Specifically the interview that occurs between Jesus and Pilate in chapter 18, verses 33 through 38.
Yes.
So Wright points out that discussion between Jesus and Pilate is more than what it seems, that it's the bringing together of the Word of God and the words of the world.
Yes.
So in that discussion, he starts talking about atonement. So Adam, what is atonement? So
without delving into atonement theories and how atonement works and whatnot, which interestingly enough, the church has never had made it like a creedal statement about how, at least not ecumenically, how atonement works. But so without delving into that, atonement just, it simply has to do with bringing peace into a relationship that was in turmoil and was estranged. The old joke of being at one meant, I mean, that is somewhat helpful. It's two parties being brought back together and whatever was dividing them being taken care of in that process.
Okay, so there are different theories of atonement.
Oh, okay.
And he names some of them.
Yes.
Do you want to name any of them?
Or? Sure. Although there are like, if I'm not mistaken, there are 3 main categories, and then there are multiple theories within them. Okay. But without getting into that, one of the earliest, I'll address 2 of the earliest first. The ransom theory,
which is my favorite, because it's more, it's more of a captivating story.
It is. It is a very captivating
I like
image.
Yeah.
So you've got Ransom, you've got another extremely early one, which both of those you find.
And our son Ransom was not named for the ransom theory of atonement. He was named for the character in the C.S. Lewis Space Trilogy. Which
I imagine Lewis knew, like, kind of the loadedness of
so
that.
He was named after Elwood Ransom from the Space Trilogy.
So ransom theory, recapitulation theory, you've got a bunch of others. You've got Christus Victor. You've got substitutionary, various expressions of substitutionary atonement. You've got
so there's no like settled way that the church sees atonement.
The church historically has talked about it in a variety of ways.
There is atonement.
Yes.
And then we use a lot of metaphors and stories to explain what happened.
Yes. Now, most Protestants would be adamant that, like, the queen of them all is a judicial view of the atonement. But yeah, the church for 2,000 years and all throughout the New Testament, you find a variety of ways of talking about what is happening in the cross, especially I would say recapitulation. I think that one is one that kind of holds them all together in a special way.
Okay. Then he talks a little bit about systematic theology.
Mm-hmm.
You can turn the page. I think it's like page 40.
Okay.
I probably wrote it. No. I wrote it in the margins.
Oh, okay. There we go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Page
okay.
42. So what do you mean? What do we mean when we say systematic theology? Like, what is systematic theology?
Okay. So there are various ways of approaching theology. You've got biblical theology, which is trying to see different themes in the scriptures and kind of pulling them all together in tension to trace out themes throughout the scriptures. But systematic theology is another specific way, and it's one of the, it's a really popular way of doing theology. You could refer to it also as systematics. And normally it's going to have 8 to 10 categories that you're kind of systematically moving through.
Okay.
Looking at just the 8 that are commonly used, and the order of them is kind of interesting. You would have like theology proper, God, humanity, sin, salvation, Christ, Holy Spirit, church, last things.
So is it at all related to cybernetics? Like systems and cybernetics?
That I don't know.
Like there are systems and there are things that flow within a system, and this thing flows to this system and the systems overlap.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah, because how can you talk theology proper about who God is, the nature of God, without talking about the triune nature of God? And that is part of the critique of systematics.
Relational look at things.
Yes. Part of the critique against systematic theology is, are we really looking at Christ 5th and the Holy Spirit 6th, and we're dealing with like, what is the nature of humanity, what is the nature of sin, what is the nature of salvation, before we even deal specifically with the person of Christ and the Spirit?
Which is why Dennis Kinlaw wrote, let's start with Jesus.
Let's start with Jesus, which immediately, yes, it starts with Jesus. It starts with like the fullness of revelation. It starts with like what the scriptures say about him being like the fullest expression of God. And if you've seen him, you've seen the Father. But that automatically turns into Trinitarian conversation, because who is Jesus? You immediately have to talk about his self-understanding, which is he is the one sent by the Father. He is the one anointed, the Messiah, anointed by the Spirit in order to anoint with the Spirit. And so you can't, if you start with Jesus, you cannot escape Trinitarian theology.
Okay. Moving into like page 43.
Okay.
So I think that Wright glosses over, like he points out the ruler of the world, but I don't feel like he gives enough like weight to the heart of that issue.
Okay.
Ephesians 6:12 says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of the present darkness, and against the spiritual forces of the heavenly places." Like that is the reality of what we're up against in the world.
But also notice there's a plurality there.
Yes.
Which, and he does later on talk about.
He does.
He talks about but he also talks about like governmental things and systems in place there. And I've heard him say elsewhere that the two really do overlap. Yes, he does believe in Satan.
Yeah.
Yes, he does believe in demons and demonic forces and whatnot. But he also sees that they more often than not prey upon human systems and persons and whatnot to do their bidding.
I think that because he didn't put enough weight into this, I think that's where we end up with some of the wrong conclusions. I feel like in chapter 4.
Okay.
Because he mentions the rule of the world, say like particular human power structures, which I read as like governments, political parties.
Yeah, sure.
That they're not the enemy. And while that may be true, they can be firmly occupied enemy territory.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 100%. Well. Yeah. And even if you're going to critique their misuse and abuse, he's adamant that it's not just a matter of pragmatics that you're critiquing them. It's you're actually doing evil.
Yeah.
If you're not careful.
And so it is true that people are not our enemy, but there are some people who are enslaved, controlled, wholly given over to the enemy. And I think that Mama Bear Apologetics, I got the book.
And not non-redemptively.
No.
It's not that, they're lost cause, might as well kill them like Hitler.
No.
But they are sincerely
this book,
captives.
Mama Bear Apologetics, if anybody has ever read this one, I liked it. I think it's for more than moms. I think it should be like parent apologetics.
I used to listen, a couple of years ago, I was listening to Mama Bear Apologetics podcasts as much as any other podcast. And I readily admitted to others, you should listen, guy or
it's not
gal,
just moms.
mom or not.
But so they put it, I think they put it best in there. And I say they because it's written by like a collection of authors.
Yeah.
So they say we're not dealing with willful rebels, but captives.
Sure.
That they're people held hostage to bad ideas.
I mean, I do think that there comes a point where someone is a willful rebel. And I think there are people throughout history and throughout, our world.
The difference between oppression and possession.
Well, yes, the difference between those two, but also some people sincerely do prefer the darkness to the light. And give themselves over, so to speak, and they're not just like unwilling, unknowing victims in a sense.
And so
that's not to say, we like dehumanize them.
No. But I feel like a lot of chapter 4 then hinges on this, that there is something out there that we just cannot just get along with.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So, in discussing the puzzle place that religion has in modern society on page 46, I love it how Wright put it, that the rumor of angels hasn't gone away.
I love that too. It's so understated.
Yeah.
And I love understatement.
And so, one of the difficult piece for most people to accept, the truth claims there are truth claims that religion offers, right?
Yeah.
And when you live in a pluralistic society, all the truth claims can't be right.
Oh, absolutely.
Like some have to be wrong.
Even if there is some overlap, like doing comparative religion stuff, you can read parts of Buddhism, specifically Sufi Islam.
Yeah, there are bits of the gospel story spread throughout.
Where you're like, hey, that sounds very Christian and very like,
right, but it is not wholly Christian, and it's not.
Well, it's like C.S. Lewis said, if the Christian faith is sincerely or is genuinely true, is thoroughly true, then you would expect to find hints of it in paganism and in other world religions and whatnot. Sure.
So some of these religious claims have to be wrong. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
But we have a society where
unless you are a pluralist,
all of these conflicting truths are just bumping up against each other daily.
Yeah.
And then all of these various truths that are often contradictory are nestling themselves into laws, into the voting booth, into the courtrooms, where they just keep conflicting more and more.
Yes.
And so he later is going to point out, well, we'll get to that later.
Okay.
We'll come around to it later. But we do have all these religions just rubbing up against each other, and they
creating friction.
And in postmodernism, everyone's truth claims are just as truthful, but that cannot be true because the truth claims are contrary to one another. Yeah. So he talks about the pragmatism and idealism in politics, which I know is something that gets on your nerves greatly. So it reminded me of the lesser evil, greater good. Yeah. Comparisons.
Yeah, and some would say that, well, that's just two ways of putting the same point, but yes, it may or may not be, but specifically in ethics, those are two totally different categories of how you do ethics. Do you succumb to the lesser evil, or are you actually fighting for the greater good? And those are different ways of.
If you're making choices based on risk versus benefit, it's one thing to choose the least risk, and it's another thing to choose the greatest benefit. Yes. Because sometimes the least risk also has the least benefit, and sometimes the least benefit has the greatest, or the greatest benefit has the least risk, or has the greatest risk. Yeah. And so in lesser good, lesser evil, greater good, sometimes the greatest good means that you leave room for an evil. Yeah. A greater evil. And sometimes choosing lesser evil means we deny the greater good.
Yes, and greater good, you're not talking strictly quantity. Yes, there is a quantitative issue to there, but it's also qualitative. And so it's not if we murder this guy and these 10 people aren't murdered, then hey, we've done the greater. It's not like that sort of just cynical calculation. It's it's recognizing that goodness is a, goodness is like kind of a way of being and a way of doing. It's not just like an accumulation of statistics and whatnot. Points. Like, if we can save this many people by oppressing this many people, then hey, we've done the greater good. Look at all the good that we've done by getting, killing all the elites and, putting everybody to work on farms again. And like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Even if it works out and doesn't become the slaughter that it always does become, is it really the greatest good?
Yeah. And so the pragmatism and idealism of politics essentially paves the way for corruption.
Yeah.
Because you have these like bills with all the junk in them that are like buying votes to support them, like the, legal blackmail type situations. So. And
legal briberies.
And like, that's somehow okay. Because it's,
we got this guy on board because we promised to send this much to his constituents. Like, is that really like how we should be doing things?
That's like mob rule. It's not anyway, that's a little aside. So he talks about God in the gaps theology, but he doesn't explain it. So what is God in the gaps theology?
And I
probably should have given you a heads up on some of these.
Yes, that would, although I did see your questions in the margins when I was reading, because I was reading after you. But if I'm not mistaken, God in the gaps is about when you have a gap in your knowledge of something that you just fill it in with, God must have done it. So like, how do we get from this to this? God must have done it.
And so I feel like we've closed the gaps. Like, I know science folks think that, but there are so many gaps.
We found all the missing links and we filled all the gaps. And
did you fill the gaps with incorrect information? Like,
that tied you over for a few generations until you realized
there's this circle of like knowledge where when you're in this circle you feel like you know everything, and once you like get beyond that you realize that you know nothing. I think it was I had to write a paper at some point, but I was reading about the Human Genome Project, the study of the human genome, and they said like when they started they had like 5 questions. And then like 10 years into the project they had like over 5 million questions. Because like the more they learned, the more they realized we didn't even know to ask these questions.
You know what?
There's so much more that we just don't know. And so you could say, well, we knew more about the human genome before we started than after, because we had less questions about it. But we really just didn't know to ask the right questions.
What Dennis Kinlaw called it autobiographically. He said this about himself. He said and he said this like in his 80s, maybe. He may have even been 90. I don't recall when he wrote it, but he said, what I have found is the more I'm learning, the more I'm experiencing something to the effect of exploding ignorance. Like he's realizing all of the other questions he hasn't even known to raise. And now he's like, I don't know what to make of this.
And you're like, I thought that this was settled in my brain. I thought that I was smart enough to know this. And you realize I didn't know a fraction of this.
But the funny thing about like living is that even when you do have it settled and because I do this with apologetics all the time, because I enjoy apologetics, but I can't live there.
No.
I don't. Yeah. And so I go through these seasons.
Do you like science? Do you like to know science, but you don't like thoroughly understand and get?
Although I learned something scientifically yesterday that was mind-blowing and fascinating.
There were lots of discussions about quantum physics and electrons,
the nature of electrons,
in our house yesterday.
Thank you, Justin Brierley. It was fascinating and amazing.
Aiden was having to explain
excited
to Adam how electrons work and how quantum
But that was the thing
works.
is he had a guest on who was explaining what they're learning about electrons and the nature of electrons and what that means for
the guy who
matter.
I think it was last year. The Nobel Peace Prize was given to like some discovery about electrons, and it was so detailed. I have no idea what they discovered. Like none, because I did not have the base knowledge to understand what was happening. Because it was about quantum physics and electrons.
So where was I going with that?
God in the gaps.
So I can't live in the world of apologetics because I don't live in the world of apologetics, but I'm fascinated by it, and every few years I'll cycle back into it and plow through some stuff. I'll pick up a book that I've read before or a new book, and I'll delve into it and kind of get lost for a few months. But I'm currently into a lot of apologetics, thanks to Justin Brierley and others. But I will have something settled in my mind, like, oh, well, I've thought through this, of course. And then, you give it some time, and before long, you're like, how well do I really know? And what does it mean to know? And so then I have to, like, get back into apologetics and whatnot. Yeah. But so even for things that we think, oh, yes, I know for certain in my mind that Jesus was raised from the dead, then it's like, yeah, but that sounds so crazy. And then you go back and explore, the work that's been done and whatnot. Yeah.
All right. So then he starts talking about, he brings back up Gnosticism, empire. What was the third thing?
Gnosticism, empire, postmodernism.
Yeah.
Postmodernism.
So the thing about Gnosticism, which it's so, like a lot of Christians are Gnostic. Oh, yeah. And they don't realize it.
Yeah. But it is the one heresy that just won't go away.
Yeah. It just keeps popping up. But it doesn't offer any type of salvation, really. It doesn't offer any type of, like,
it offers
being
escape
for others.
It offers escape.
Like, it's just the personal illumination for the sake of being illuminated.
Well, yes.
Like, there's no sense that it would better the world around it.
No. None. Because matter is bad.
There's no outreach.
It is to be escaped.
There's no evangelism. There's just the elevated self.
It is Eastern influence, not to disparage Easternism as a whole, but like that's why it does sound so much like Buddhism. Like the problem is matter and desire, and if you can get rid of desire, you can slip into nirvana.
And I feel like a lot of people in missions have probably found this, but like the Western mind and the Eastern mind work completely different because of enculturation. Like it's not that like there's something different with our brain.
Talking about the way of thinking, not the concept of what the mind is, right?
No, like the way of thinking, like just the way you think through things, the things that you think of, the
priorities you have and values,
totally different. And like the Western mind almost can't comprehend
why an Eastern person would think the way they do.
Yeah, fully Eastern, and an Eastern mind cannot comprehend fully Western. Yeah, like it's just. Like, there's so many, like, basics that are just, like, lacking to understand the opposite. And
it's funny because it seems that when one from the West, like, is immersed in the East, they start to, like, value it and be like, what's wrong with all these Westerners? And vice versa. You know, someone from the East migrates to the West, they love liberty and individuality and personal responsibility.
It in a completely different way.
Yes.
Like, so even someone from the West that immerses themselves in, like, Gnosticism or New Age philosophy, like, there's gonna be, like, those, like, little loops that their brain gets caught in where they just can't, like, fully process
they can't reconcile the tension?
Yeah, because there's gonna be little pieces that are, like, out of sorts.
Yeah.
You know? So, he talks about our culture sees truth claims as power claims.
Because truth is power.
Right. Because remember, postmodernism, all meta-narratives are oppressive. A truth claim is saying that I have the only true narrative, right? Yeah. So that's extremely oppressive. However, I did note that our culture also sees individual truth claims as unquestionable. Yeah. You're not allowed to question somebody else's truth.
Because it's theirs.
Yeah, because it's theirs. So it like is logically nonsensical. Because to make a truth claim is asserting power, but also to make a truth claim cannot be questioned.
Yeah. Yeah.
But everybody's doing it.
So we could get in trouble for this example, so maybe I'll refrain.
Maybe skip that example.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll give you that example after church on Sunday.
Yes, if you're curious, just text me or whatever.
You want to hang out after church?
I mean, it is the epitome of absurdity and how personal truth claims are unquestionable.
So I do like that he points out that the kingdom of God is for this world, not from this world.
Yes, and he's made that comment before and elsewhere. I've heard him say it 100 times, but he digs into it quite a bit here. Yes.
Yes, that this is that the kingdom of God is to establish his kingdom and reclaim the world that's been held captive. And
at the bottom of 51, he says that this kingdom concept is world affirming and indeed world reclaiming, which is what you just mentioned. Yes. So it affirms creation and it redeems creation.
Right.
It's intended to do both, which is what resurrection
right.
and new creation is. It's affirming this body, but also redeeming it.
Right. That this is not, and it's not an escapism. It's not the story of how Christians can go to heaven. It's not, the kingdom of God is not like, this is how we're going to protect these people and then take them to our place.
Yes.
It's about how we're bringing all this back to new creation.
Yes.
I also appreciate that you pointed out all Caesar can do is kill you.
That's on 55?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah, 55. I thought that was funny.
Yes.
All right.
Which it's, again, quite understated because, wait a minute, who wants to die? But that's all he can do. Yeah.
All right. Moving on to chapter 4. God,
chapter
the
4,
earthly powers and terror. Yeah,
yes. All right, so now we're into the mess.
So
into the weeds.
Yes. So page 58 says, all these have shown, if any demonstration were needed, that the much vaunted European Enlightenment of 2 centuries ago is still a long way from producing liberty, equality, and fraternity. That basically the Enlightenment says we're at the peak of human existence, and all these evils are about to die out, and then of course they didn't.
And with liberty, equality, fraternity, was that the motto of the French Revolution, or was that the Soviet?
I have no idea.
I have
not.
When he said fraternity, I was like, wait a minute, that's.
I have not delved deeply.
That ends
into
up
either.
going dark. I know. Whoever that held that motto.
So on page 59, he says that multiculturalism has gone too far.
Okay. Yes.
And that it may lead to social and cultural chaos.
Yeah.
But because you're not supposed to say this, it's politically correct to lash out and say religion is the real culprit.
Yes.
I think he's wrong. I think religion is the real culprit.
Okay.
I think that it's worldview.
Yeah.
I think that it's those embedded core beliefs about God,
that are
humanity,
running into conflict.
History. That I think that it's that's running into conflict.
But I do think he's right in that the atheists do categorize all religions the same way because it's baked in that they're all bogus and power grabs and oppressive. And so they're lumping them all the way. But the fact is, if Jesus was raised from the dead, then that changes the whole game.
Right. But I do think...
So not all religions are created equal.
But I do think that... Right. But I do think that in a pluralistic society, it is the religions that are going to cause the most friction. Because I think, like, there's so much diversity within Christianity. And Christianity hasn't evolved into chaos. There's cultural diversity within Christianity. Like, even from you're talking about the American church, the African church, the Haitian church, that's plenty of diversity. But even within Faith Methodist Church and, I suddenly can't think of any other churches in our area.
There are no other churches. If you're in the area, you should be going to Faith Methodist.
Faith Methodist Church or Westridge or Burnt Hickory Baptist, even the
Midway Presbyterian Church.
The culture within all of those churches is drastically different.
Oh yeah.
But Christianity has not devolved into chaos because it's not the cultures that's really the sticking point. It's those internal core beliefs. It's those that deep down worldview that religion offers.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is what is causing the social cultural chaos.
Yeah.
I think it is religion. I don't think that it's just cultural. I think cultures can exist side by side if they have similar core beliefs.
Mm.
I think, because you think of the Korean Seventh-day Adventists in America, right?
Yeah.
They clearly have their own completely different culture. But deep down, the things that we believe are the same. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Not
say we are the same, but yeah, sure.
Yeah. But those core issues, who is God? What are humans? What is truth? What is the afterlife? What is death?
Because to be clear,
what is history?
Yes.
The meaning of history. Yeah. Those things are all going to be the same.
If
we're all biblical.
Most folks, when they hear of Seventh-day Adventism, they think, isn't that a cult or a heresy?
There are two branches, I feel like. I feel like there are the heretic ones and then there are the Orthodox ones.
Well, as a whole, it's never been categorized in the same way that Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormon Church. Yeah.
I think it can lean that way.
There are things...
I think individuals can lean that way, but I don't think as a whole it is outside of orthodoxy.
Yeah.
NT So on page 59,
Okay.
He says there's a world of difference between. I'm going to ask you what you think about this
Okay.
quote, or I can tell you what I think about this quote and then ask you what you think
Okay.
about this quote.
Okay.
So, there's a world of difference between an open and generous secular world where people of every point of view are free to find fresh ways of living and working together, and a secularist world which does its best to banish the rumor of God from the public square altogether. Do you want me to tell you my thoughts before? Or are you
let me tell you my thoughts first.
Okay. What if I disagree with you and we have an argument?
That's fine. Well,
if
you say something that I disagree with,
one of our dinner time debates on camera.
Am I going to be quiet about it?
No.
So, yes, there is a world of difference because those are two different ways of.
Don't look at mine.
Okay, I'm looking through it. I'm not looking at it. Those are two different ways of defining what we mean by secular, and that's kind of a predicament that I'm in right now, currently writing, is how do we understand secularism, or how do we understand the secular age, or the secular world, and what does it mean to be secular? And there's the Charles Taylor way of defining it, which is going to be far more influenced in my thinking and writing. And then there's the kind of the conventional wisdom way of describing it, which is how most of the people at our church would even describe it as like, oh, you've got the religious and then you've got the secular, and that's an okay split, which interestingly enough is how Tom Holland describes secularism. He describes secularism as a product not Spider-Man, which is funny because that was a joke that Justin Brierley made on that episode that got me talking with Aiden. But yes, the historian Tom Holland describes secularism as a product of the Christian, the Jesus revolution, that it creates room for something other than like religion, which begs the question, well, what is religion? Is it something that's just done on Saturdays if you're a Seventh-dayist, or just on Sundays, or is it something that's privatized? I would say that's a better understanding of what happened at 500 years ago and going forward into the Enlightenment and beyond, is secularism has become this two-tiered way of thinking about the world, as Wright describes, where you've got the religious stuff and values and that sort of stuff, and then you've got like the real world of money and politics and how to do community and things like that. And rather than them being like structured this way, instead secularism is more, if they're structured that way and this way. You've got the world, the secular world, and then you've got religion, which is private and inner.
Right.
And that's how many evangelicals live their faith, is inner, private, and they get together. So that kind of gets together.
So number one, secular is not neutral.
No.
To leave God out of something is intentional, and it says something.
See, you sound like Charles Taylor now.
That is not a neutral.
And I like it.
That is not a neutral stance.
Yes.
So the secular world that leaves these free, fresh ways of living and working together, it has to logically conclude in the secularist world.
Like it has to logically become secularism?
Yeah, it has to. It has to. The secular world cannot help but lead to the secularist world.
Why would you say that?
Because in order to maintain unity, for all those things to be happening, everyone's going to have to push religion to the private.
Yeah.
Everyone has. So the secularist world is the natural consequence. You can't have say, oh, there's a secular world where we're all just free to have our own points of view.
Agree to disagree.
Because that is naturally going to lead to a secularist world. Like,
yes.
In order to maintain that secular world.
I think you're a Charles Taylor disciple.
I've never read him. I've never read him.
You would like him.
I'm just saying, the secularist world that wants to banish the rumor of God from the public square, that is a necessity to have the secular world. You have to banish. You have to say, people in polite society don't talk about God. We don't talk about religion. Yeah. We don't talk about politics. You have to have the off-topic things that are just always going to be private, that are never allowed to be public.
Yeah.
And I don't think that biblical Christianity can fit in that. I don't think biblical Christianity can be private. Because
biblical Christianity is the declaration that Jesus is Lord. Overall. Caesar's not. Yeah. Yep.
So, anyway.
I think we agree.
That's kind of where
I think we agree, and I think, it is two different ways of thinking about and talking about what do we mean by secular.
But one has to lead to the other.
They do.
Like, you can't have these two levels.
Yeah.
Like, it can't stay. Well, I'm not talking about everybody, like, banishing God from the public. Well, you have to. Like, if you're talking about people like, oh, everyone's free to have their own point of view, you have to banish certain topics. You have to say there are things that we're just not going to talk about.
Yeah. So I think he's trying. I do
I'm
think
just thinking
he's
family reunion.
Yeah.
Like, if you want the family to be happy, there are certain things
we want everybody. We want everybody to just be themselves and relax. But don't you dare talk about the things that are really most important to you.
Or don't talk about the things that are uncomfortable to the family.
Yeah.
Like, you need to not talk about these things so that the family can have cohesion and get along. Right?
Yeah.
And so as a society, secularism says, okay, we have to all do that. Like, nobody can really mean any of these things.
Yeah.
Because getting along in society is more important. Anyway. So the Enlightenment reminds me of the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
It seems like it's just the Tower of Babel story replaying itself, that we think we know, and we can lift ourselves up, and, and then we all learn
History
French.
doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
So on page 60, he says that all empires claim that they possess justice, freedom, and peace, and that they have a duty to share these things with everybody else. And I would just say that a biblical worldview would say some of those empires are closer to the kingdom of God than others.
Yes.
And that all empires are not equal. There are definitely some that are that are far more evil than others.
In the same way that even in Israel's history of kings.
Oh yeah, some were good. You've
got some
were
went
bad,
the way of their fathers. Some were like David.
Some were middlings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I found that funny because we've been reading in 1 Kings lately. I'm behind on my Bible reading.
Me too.
So I've been in Kings. I won't say how far behind. You can be my friend on YouVersion Bible app and find out how far behind I am.
Oh gosh, I forgot that stuff's public.
It totally is. Anyway, you can be his friend on YouVersion Bible app and find out how far behind he is on his. But we've been doing chronological. So
yes,
this year. But there was like a little in my Bible. There's like a little chart that was like the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel.
Yeah.
And it was like color coded whether they were good, bad, or
Israel's all bad.
Or in the middle. Yeah. And so it's like
they're all bad.
One's all and
Judah,
some had like some good,
not many.
some middling, like
yeah.
But I thought that was funny. That was but also they all die and they all go sleep with their fathers, whether they're good or bad.
Yeah.
So I do think that all empires are not equal, though.
Sure.
That saying like, oh well, empires, oceans, empires rise, oceans.
I was thinking of that song
fall.
When you said
oceans rise, empires fall. Like,
yeah.
Okay, well, some empires should fall.
Yes, they do. Yes.
And we should celebrate the fall of some empires, and some empires we should mourn the fall of those empires. So, because some of them are closer to a biblical Christian look than others.
Yeah.
Okay, so on page 61, so it bothers me that he did not cite his source.
I'm wondering.
It bothered me hard.
I'm wondering if he knew. Surely he knows Alexander
And maybe
Solzhenitsyn.
he's just heard it so many times, and maybe it's so ingrained in him. You know how it gets like that.
You think
things get so into you, and you repeat them so much, I
mean, He's not directly quoting him, but obviously the line between good and evil is his phrase.
So the quote is, what's more, the line between good and evil doesn't lie between us and them, but it runs a jagged line through each human being and each human society.
So he's playing with it. And
so Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who lived through the atrocities of Stalin's Soviet Union, who was...
Don't mispronounce it.
I cannot say the word, so you can say...
The Gulag Archipelago.
I cannot say that word.
It's not the archipelago.
Anyway, so Alexander Solzhenitsyn, he was the one that said that the line between good and evil runs through each and every human heart. It's not between countries or nations.
Yeah, it's not that party, this party. He teases it out far more.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, yeah. So it bothered me that he didn't cite his source, but I do understand that maybe he's played with it so long in his head that there's no source to cite for him anymore.
Yeah.
That he kind of, But and I do find it interesting that he's using it to talk about government and to talk about like earthly government. And the originator of the quote is one who lived through an atrocious empire. Like he and still Alexander Solzhenitsyn, even despite living through an atrocious empire, is not going to say like, well, they're evil.
The problem is,
and we're good. He's going to say it's in each of us.
Yeah.
You know?
That's what we become if we give ourselves to the darkness.
Yeah. Like anybody has that capacity.
Yeah.
So, and then I also wanted to point out that we have an additional 8 years of history after when this book was written.
Yeah, and that is a generous thing to point out.
Specifically when it comes to Muslim immigration, especially specifically in Europe.
Well, yeah, what it's doing in Britain, his own Britain.
Than when he wrote this book.
Yeah.
And so we've been working at this side-by-side thing. Britain has been working at this side-by-side thing for a while, and it's kind of not working out. As the current protests and riots would kind of give an example, that it's not as easy as just, oh, we can all get along.
Although that's the funny thing is he constantly does offer the corrective that, hey, it's not as simple as this. It's not as simple as we have to make it. But then sometimes he offers what seem they seem like simple platitudes, but then he's like, yes, it's going to be complicated working through it, but if we just do this, it's like, yeah, but what does that mean to just?
So I'm saying we have 8 years. So I think that he doesn't fully understand the complexities of what it means to have two worldviews living next door.
At least not 8 years ago.
8 years ago. He doesn't, he 8 years ago could not have understood what it was like for Muslims and Christians and atheists to be like all in the same neighborhood. And so it essentially has turned little pockets of the world, little neighborhoods and little areas into the Middle East where you see that constant fighting, constant battling, constant warring.
Yeah. It's like the balkanization of like small communities in small countries like Britain, which I know Britain's not tiny, but compared to the U.S., landmass it is.
Landmass it is very tiny.
But you've got these, you've got these balkanized groups where this is this community, and if you're part of that community, you stay away from this community, and so there are a lot more. It is like constantly like simmering
way
conflicts.
More complex than this secular world where everyone just has fresh ways of living and working together.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't work out like that.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't like bear out. And I think historically we're saying that it doesn't bear out because I think a lot of people in Britain kind of thought we can learn to get along. We can accept refugees.
Yeah, we're compassionate. We're dignified. We can do this.
Yes, we can do this. And for most of them are secular. So most of them don't have a religious anything. And so they're like, man, what difference does it make to us?
Yeah.
You know? And it doesn't work out the way you think that it's going to. So a lot of what Wright points down to this chapter... And
none of that is to suggest that people should be cruel to refugees.
No, not at all.
Or inhospitable to them or anything like that.
Anything about accepting immigration.
Yeah.
Because we are to care for the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner.
Yeah.
Like, we're supposed to care for these people. And so, but it does say something about how we're to care for these people and what role in society we all kind of play. Mm-hmm. Like, how are we doing it? How are we integrating them? And are we integrating them in ways that are not fair to them?
Yeah.
Like, are we integrating immigrants and expecting them to just, like, plop down in the middle of the, of a completely westernized world and just roll with it?
Yeah.
Because that's completely foreign to them, and it's not, like, fair that they don't know how not that they don't know how these things work, but, like, it's a completely different culture, and it's a completely different way of living, and it may not be what they want to do.
Yeah.
To
privatize their religious faith.
They don't want to privatize their religious faith. They want to be able to worship how they want to worship, just like we want to be able to worship how we want to worship. Most
people of other religions are not secularists.
No.
They don't buy into that's for
we don't
temple,
talk about this
and
in
that's
private
for synagogue,
society.
or that's for
you go to the mosque to do that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that's not how that works.
That's good for your family and for your mosque, but
that's not how any of this works.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of what Wright points out in chapter 4 is it kind of boils down to like,
would he say the same thing 8 years later?
Not that, but
that's what I'm wondering.
Do Christians have a biblical worldview or not? Like, when we're talking about like the course of history, like, do we have a biblical worldview or not? Do we believe that history is pointing us toward new creation or not? Like, do we, Pilate in John 18 asked Jesus, what is truth? Like, he doesn't go into this, and Jesus doesn't even go into it. But like, does our worldview have an answer for that? What is truth?
Yeah.
And I would say that, well, Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and life. So what is truth? Jesus' truth. Like, we know who is truth.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is, I know a lot of people think that worldview doesn't exist, that that's like a thing, that worldview is like a made up construct. And as like a model, an image model, it is a made up construct, but it points to a real reality. That'd be like saying personality doesn't exist because personality is a made up model that we use to try to understand how people think. And that is true, but that does not mean those characteristics that make up personality do not exist.
Well, and some people who deny the idea of worldview, they think that it's too clunky and abstract of a term, and so they'll use Charles Taylor's term, I think, which is social imaginary.
Yeah.
Which is like, I think it's a fresh, helpful. It's sometimes helpful to think about an idea that you kind of take for granted with some fresh terms, fresh terminology, and it does lead to more like, how do you, what do you imagine like the role of society as a whole to be, what it means to relate to others within a society like that. That's kind of a fresh way of thinking about what we typically mean by worldview. Yeah. Which is part of the problem with some Christians, is that we chalk up worldview as it's these 5 or 6 ideas.
I think Sire, it's 8. It's like 8 categories of things. Which is just.
But worldview is far more a way of living and a way of sensing the world, not just these are the truth claims that I hold about the world.
But a lot of those social imaginative things are like tertiary from a core belief issue. Yeah. Like, what do I imagine the role of society to be has something to say about what do I think is good and evil? What do I think is like the nature of humanity? Like,
where do we come from? Where are we going?
Yeah, those kind of go into then, okay, well, what do I think is the role of society? Yeah. So I feel like saying it's social imagination, okay, well, you turned like a primary thing into a tertiary thing. Okay, that's the down the road. And maybe that's, a lot of times those down the road tertiary things are easier to see than the core things. Yeah. All right, so on page 67, he says, the problem with the world of humans cannot be reduced to a lack of information. Which similarly, C.S. Lewis in Why I'm Not a Pacifist, this made me go read that essay. Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't find the book. It's fine. I found it on. He has loaned our Weight of Glory to somebody. If you have our Weight of Glory, we want it back. And we couldn't find it.
But we'll never find you because I won't remember who I gave it to.
And so I had to read it on Everand because I couldn't find it. And then I wasn't happy because I wasn't able to like write in it. Anyway. Because it was a digital book and you can't write in a digital book. Anyway, so C.S. Lewis says, you cannot argue a man into seeing green if he sees blue. Yeah. And he followed that up by explaining, you cannot produce rational intuition by argument because argument depends upon rational intuition. But that's why
either they think that way or they don't. You can't argue them into
thinking the way you want them to think. People think the way they think. And C.S. Lewis does point out that there are habits, there are ways of changing those inner things, those ways of thinking. There are, I think he specifically mentions habits and like conversion experiences and things that do change that, but argument can't do that.
Yeah, if someone is if someone is okay with defying the law of non-contradiction because they think it's just a power play, what you mean by that law, if they're cool with that, there's no way to convince them otherwise. No. The only, perhaps discomfort in life that comes from trying to live, what's it called? Cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Perhaps that does trigger someone to say, what can I do to get rid of this dissonance?
Because there's always like an uneasiness.
But you're not gonna argue someone into believing that the law of contradiction should be thought of as a law, and that they should therefore change their ideas.
So then going back to his mutual respect and winning hearts and minds, that's why that conclusion isn't a logical conclusion.
Which conclusion?
On page 63, his conclusion that there's this like secular world utopia where we can just like work to win the hearts. Now
he doesn't say there's because he even mocks those who promise a utopia. But that there can
mocks those who present a utopia.
Not
he
mocks. He probably wouldn't like
describes
being
a
said
humanist utopia.
Yeah, where we just kind of work side by side.
So the mutual understanding and respect, winning hearts and minds, that isn't a logical conclusion. Because you cannot. He says it's not a lack of information. Like. We're not getting. It has nothing. When our worldviews differ so much, when the beliefs that we hold core to our being are so distinctly other than someone else, mutual understanding is not possible.
Yeah,
we can't just live and let live.
Yeah,
like there are times when you can't. There is something in a Christian worldview that says, "Hey, this is a person before me who's made in the image of God, loved by Jesus, and Jesus died for this person."
Mm-hmm.
And so there is an amount of love and understanding that can come to their person, but to their ideas and to the way that they want to live out those ideas in the world, that may be completely contradictory.
Yeah.
And we're not going to come to understanding by like mutual understanding and respect.
No, but I do think it's important for Christians to live amongst non-Christian people respectfully, understandingly, patiently, and living out the life of Christ before an unbelieving world, shining as lights, as Paul says. And I do think there are times when you find that people are won over by that, or at least are intrigued by it, and they want to know more, or realize, hey, you're someone I can trust and come to when life is spiraling. And so I do think that there are gospel inroads. But you're not gonna into
it. There's no
and that's logical. Not the sum total of what it means to evangelize. Like, live it among them and they'll be won over. Like, no, that's
is a
not
proclaiming to evangelizing.
Yeah.
And
but there is evangelism is not just
there is also a caring for, caring for the widows, the orphans, the foreigners. Like
making it a point to
live
out
that living out your theology.
Yeah.
So you wrote over here.
Over here? Oh gosh.
When you talked
about we don't have to talk about that.
Okay, you don't want to talk about Michael Heiser?
No.
I mean, of the world?
I would encourage anybody who's not read anything by Michael Heiser to pick up his,
Supernatural?
I'd say pick up Supernatural if you've not read any of his stuff. If you've been through seminary and so you're wanting to dig into like Greek and Hebrew terms, or specifically Hebrew terms, then The Unseen Realm is definitely going to bring more receipts, and it's the more academic of the two. But
all right, on page 69, you made a note talking about new creation Eden springing up in the wilderness.
Yeah.
So you get to explain
but not directed toward like a return to Eden, but kind of directed toward New Jerusalem, because that's essentially what New Jerusalem kind of is pictured as. It's
from
a
city
garden.
To a garden city.
Yeah. Yes.
And not like the city in the forest like Atlanta is.
Yeah. No. No. So it was in response to. So at the top of 69, he says, and that activity is not. What activity is he talking about? God's work, and maybe that activity is not, as it were, a matter of Jesus striding around doing impossible things to prove how divine he was. I do think that's often how we think of the Gospels. Is like, Jesus is like doing all the tricks to prove who he is. Well, if that's the case, then why kill him?
He's just restoring.
And why would the disciples have ever doubted? Like, if all those things were intended to just be proof so that everybody would know for certain, he really is a God among us, that's kind of a weird way of reading the Gospels, but we often do it that way.
I mean,
because we think of the miraculous as so
if you're
contrary
reading Mark,
to nature.
You read Mark as Jesus and his disciples are demon hunters.
Yes. So here's what he says.
The Gospel of Mark is just different.
He continues saying, rather, Jesus' powerful actions are all about the breaking in of new creation into the world of the old. A new creation in which the Creator's original intention is fulfilled through signs which point forward to the day when God will eventually make all things new, put all things to rights, and wipe away all tears from all eyes. So that just made me think, like, what's really happening? And it's Eden is springing up in the wilderness. But not directed toward just like, oh, little Eden pockets in wilderness, but like, no, New Jerusalem is coming.
Yeah.
But the work of the kingdom before New Jerusalem is the wild world that it is, broken and dark and in many ways like just wanting.
And bringing back in the sons and daughters so they can go to the New Jerusalem with them.
Yes. Which is why when Paul says that if anyone is in Christ, boom, he's a new creation, he ties that in with us being ambassadors for Christ. Like, he is commissioning us out like the disciples. Like, hey, it's your job to go proclaim the kingdom and cast out demons.
Right.
Go get them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Wright asserts that God intends for humans to live under human management. And I think that he's wrong because...
I mean, I do think orderly, but management is such a awkward word.
But in Israel... Yeah. Israel wants a king like all the other nations, and God's like, hey, I'm your king, remember?
Yes.
And you don't need a king like all the other nations. You just need to live under me.
No.
Well, priests.
We can assume that, but...
We can say that the priesthood, that is...
Well, you got the priests and the prophets already.
That's kind of a human man, but yeah, I would say that it's not... I would say that it's not exactly.
Yahweh's critique was not just that they wanted a king. It was that they wanted a king like all the other nations.
Yeah.
But there are hints before that Yahweh intended them to have a king. That he intended there to be a David on the throne. But that their problem was they wanted it. They wanted this king with the wrong intentions and toward the wrong end. They wanted a strong man like all the other nations. They specifically said who can lead us into battle like all the other nations. And so the problem was not with what they wanted. It was with why they wanted it. Because Yahweh
think he's right?
I think no, I'm not saying, he's right. But I am saying that it's if you read the Old Testament, even before you have Saul, even before Israel is requesting a king, Yahweh, on the one hand, tells Samuel things that suggest he's intending to give them a king, and on the other hand, that he has a problem with how they're asking or why they're asking for a king.
Yeah.
But a king in Israel was not a plan B because, I guess they want a king, so I guess I'll give them a king. That no. Jesus was always going to be the son of David. And who's this David character?
Yeah.
And he's the king, the good king.
But was David intended to be the first king?
Well, that's the interesting thing because when
Did they have the split in the battles because they insisted on a king in the wrong time?
That I don't know, but there's this crazy weird passage where Samuel tells Saul, your kingdom could have been an everlasting kingdom, but it's been torn away from you. And that Dr. Oswalt in our Old Testament class said that begs the question: could Jesus have been the son of Saul? But Saul blew it. We don't know, but yeah.
I'm too much of a libertarian to accept
I know I am as well.
I need the government.
But if you think about it, even
may just be a reaction to the government that I have lived under.
Even then, and you're still going to have social ordering. You're still going to have families functioning in a way where there's
families and communities, but voluntarism is my ideal form of government.
Well, it is a form of human management. That term human management is so awkward. It's so like DMV sounding.
So he calls for selfless stewardship of leaders in church and government.
Yeah.
But I don't think selfless stewardship is even possible outside of a Christian framework.
Well.
Or desirable outside of a Christian framework. It's only in a Christian framework that selfless stewardship even makes sense.
Yeah.
Because that's not how the world works. That's not how any other religion is set up to work.
Yeah.
So I like that he points out on page 72 that God's Spirit is at work whether the rulers know it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Where was that?
Page 72.
Okay. Wrong page.
So he argues then that Christians should logically argue for divine obedience from their government. Basically holding them to the task. Yeah. But logically, the logic of God is not the logic of man. So it doesn't follow. Logic, if you define it in the way that like Canon Press defines logic, is that which is accordance to God's law. Yeah. But like his ways are higher than our ways, his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. So
but that doesn't mean
God's goals and values are not necessarily going to fit into a secular worldview.
Well, no.
Caring for widows, orphans, and foreigners is not always going to fit into a secular worldview. Yeah. I don't think that you could have encouraged Stalin to be more compassionate
think of the children.
To widows, orphans, and foreigners, and therefore that would have made his government magically better. Yeah. Or right. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so you're assuming that the government is already to some extent Christianly aligned.
At least thinking Christianly, having Christian values.
At least having shadows. Yeah. Somewhere in there.
Well, Just I don't think you go into China and start trying this, that's not going to work. Yeah. Because they don't have the same basis of core beliefs and values for it to work. Mm-hmm. Empires are not created equal. So you're assuming a Christian empire or a Christian-based empire that even allows you to do that. Mm-hmm. All right, so page 74. Yeah. They're all the same dangers of abuse and power. Yeah. So I'm not sure why, given that, I'm not sure why that Wright thinks the UN, that has radically different election processes, more power than any individual country, would not abuse their power on a wider scale and to a greater extent than the current national governments of the world. If to keep national governments, the exercise or the abuse of power of national governments in check, we need a global government. What's ever to keep that abuse of power in check. Right. Yeah. Which is why I think government that is smaller and more local is the ideal, localized government. What is centralized and globalized and larger. And I did point that out. Yes. The more localized the government, the better able to reflect and serve its people. Yes. So a giant UN is not going to be able to reflect and serve its people well. It's always going to be going for greater good, which means that some people lose when you're talking about greater good. And its understanding of greater good is not like it's not the ethical humanist. Greater good idea that I would propose. It is a raw calculus of it's the same thing that I forget what her name was. Oh goodness gracious. Yeah, it's this like an 8-year-old woman. It's the type of greater good that can look an interviewer in the face and when asked about killing millions of innocent children, can say yes, I think it was worth it. Like whoa, what? Right. Yes. And so I'm not saying that the war on terror, because he talks a lot about the war on terror. I'm not saying that was right or that unfolded the correct way. Mm-hmm. I'm just not sure doing nothing or letting the UN handle it would have been any better. Yeah. And I feel like the war on terror was a unique situation in
history because it was a conflict not of nations but of ideas and worldviews.
Yeah.
Like, it essentially is, this is what happens when worldviews collide. Yes.
And honestly, yeah. And it number one, it didn't begin on 9/11, and number two,
no.
Number two, it didn't, 9/11 was obviously a dramatic shift and change.
That's when it hit our
But
our
it also didn't happen in a vacuum.
No.
It wasn't, it wasn't as it often is characterized as being, that everything was fine, everyone was at peace, and then 9/11 happened, so now we've got to enter and declare a war on terror, like we've done the war on poverty and the war on drugs and all that sort of stuff, which have just been fantastic. Like, they've really they've eradicated poverty and eradicated the use of drugs.
So I'm not saying that the American government is Christian or that the American government is good.
Or that that America is the church, which it's not, or that the American church is, or not the American, that America is ancient Israel, which it's not.
No. And so I am Christian first, American later than that.
You didn't say second, I love. Yes.
I don't know where it falls.
Yes. You are an American, yes. You value being American.
I value being American. I am proud to be an American.
Where at least you know you're free.
Like the song says, but I am also not under any illusion that our government is good or functional.
Yes.
So.
Where at least you know you're free unless a virus breaks out.
Yeah. I mean, free to do what they tell you can do, as long as it's within the realms of, what they let you do.
Yes.
So a lot of his conclusions here at the end sound like humanism and not biblical Christianity, to be honest.
Yeah, but I think it's possible to be a Christian humanist, and
he specifically says to change your worldview to common humanity.
No, hang on. What does he say? He says, the way to eliminate the causes of terror is to seize every opportunity to work together, to talk together, to discover what makes people. He sounds like John Lennon. I'm sorry.
Which is humanism. It is humanism.
To hang on. To discover what makes, and I'm not opposed to talking together and walking together, working together, all that. All right. So he's to discover what makes people tick within worldviews quite unlike our own. Okay, great. And in short, as was said by the armies in Iraq, but without much visible effect, to win hearts and minds, sure, not necessarily to a Christian worldview, certainly not to a modern secular Western worldview, but to a shared worldview of common humanity.
Is not a Christian worldview.
Yeah. Well, he's saying, what is the role?
He's saying we need to have a shared common worldview of humanity.
No. Yes. He's saying that what we can aspire to may not be to win people over to a Christian worldview, but to at least let's all get along.
That is not what we're called to do. We're called to go into all the world and make more and better disciples, which means bringing them to a Christian worldview. But
his point is that the role of the feds? Is that the role of, British Parliament?
I don't know what the role of British Parliament
to Christianize
is.
the world.
I don't understand the British government at all.
Yeah.
I've read the history, and it's like some kind of faux democracy they got going on over there.
Yeah.
I don't understand
Some
it.
kind of faux democracy.
But he talks about having a worldview of common humanity, which basically says we should all have a secular worldview. That we should have genuine justice by human definition, genuine peace by human definition, not by a biblical definition, because justice according to the Bible means that some of these other worldviews have to die. Peace according to the Bible.
Not people who hold those worldviews, but the worldviews themselves.
The ideas.
Yes.
The ideas have to go.
Yes.
And peace. So it's interesting. We were talking about kings, the kings of Judah, the good kings. The thing that was granted to them was peace.
Yeah, there was peace in Israel.
There was peace. Yeah. Then those with Judah, those with different worldviews, those that were not of the faith, were kept outside the borders.
Yeah,
that was the peace that was granted to good kings. That what was granted to bad kings was wars, and so, our current government, why would we expect anything but wars?
But the
And we're not Israel.
The comparison,
and we're not
exactly.
Judah.
The comparison is the church to ancient Israel, not America to ancient Israel,
right.
not Westernism to ancient Israel.
Right.
It is the church, and peace for the church and justice. Yeah, thinking just of peace. Peace for the church does not necessarily mean America's prosperity and, you know, remaining a superpower in the world. Like, it's possible for the church globally to have peace, and the various nations through which they're scattered to do what they're going to do, and to rise and fall, and, you know, that sort of stuff.
Right. But I don't understand.
But you can't equate like modern governments to the church.
No, but I also don't understand how you cannot pursue like what you think is the best and right and correct. Like, how am I going to pursue a lesser goal just because I'm like, well, it's the government.
Well, maybe
it's like it's that whole we can't legislate morality. All legislation is morality.
It is, yeah. Well, maybe
is legislating morality, like every legislation is legislating morality, like laws against murder are legislating the morality of not killing people.
But maybe if you value incrementalism and you're saying, hey, if we can at least do this, then maybe we can create inroads for that.
How is that not idealism and pragmatism?
Well, I don't know.
That he was talking against.
I don't know.
So I feel like the enemy is at work and he's thriving in our world. And I don't know how a Christian can do anything but try to bring the kingdom of God here. I don't know how we can do anything but try to proclaim Jesus here.
Yeah.
And I don't see how, like, aspiring for peace is of a higher order than aspiring for Jesus to be proclaimed among all the nations.
And by, I'm assuming, by bring the kingdom, you mean, like, working within and for the values of it.
Yeah, and new creation.
Yeah.
People being changed, lives being changed. People being
released
from captivity. Like, that sort of thing.
People on the outside being made to feel like, you know,
because
that they're welcomed.
Justice looks very different from humanitarian justice, humanism justice, right? Because biblical justice would say, like, you know, that the slaves in China, that's just wrong. Like, they're people made in the image of God. Slavery, like, there should not be that form of slavery. Humanitarian justice would say, well, they're being provided like a place to live, a place, you know, like it could justify those things.
Like, what country could take these in and put them on
the justice is, I don't know, it's just not even justice, because I feel like justice is bringing things to right with what they were created to be.
Yeah.
Like, justification before God is the only way you can have justice. And so anything short of that is not justice.
Yeah.
Anyway, so also...
right.
I also wonder, how does this utopia that he's describing, he is describing utopia despite him talking about it being against utopias, how is that leading anyone to Jesus and new creation? If we can do what he says and we can bring people into this worldview of common humanity where we can all just like get along and we can learn to, like, how does that bring people to Jesus, like, in his mind? Like, how does he think that does what the Bible says we should do, which is make more and better disciples among all the nations, including our own? Like, he says that. Jesus tells us that's what we're doing. How does this... Well, if we can just have a common humanity and understand each other and live together, like, how does that achieve that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean,
maybe he'll get into it more.
Maybe that's a question to ask him, or maybe
I can't ask NT Wright anything. I don't know.
You can email him. There was literally a podcast. I ask NT Wright anything. That's the name of the podcast. Justin Burley did it.
So I feel like Wright was asking
awesome.
a lot of the right questions here. I feel like he was pointing out a lot of correct issues here.
Maybe he would say, though, he's like, if governments would work this way and societies would work this way, and then the church can do its work, and it creates a greater context for evangelism.
Yeah,
perhaps.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I just feel like his conclusions put too much hope into the hands of humanity that's held captive by
people with governmental power.
Of humanity that's held captive by the enemy.
Yeah.
You're putting a lot of hope and trust into people that are given to darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that that's the correct route to go. So,
Well, that was fun.
Next week, chapter 5 and 6.
5 and 6. What are they titled? Power, Faith, and the Law. Again, no Oxford comma.
Ask Adam on Sunday.
And then God, Power,
church.
and Human Flourishing. Again, no Oxford comma. Good.
Ask Adam on Sunday after church about his example that would get him into trouble.
Oh, my. Yes. Yes.
And church is at the library this Sunday?
Yes. The library this Sunday.
2
o'clock. And that example, if I blank, just remind me it's about a dude. All right?